Stand in Istanbul today, and you're in a sprawling megacity of 15 million people. The Bosphorus glitters with cargo ships. Skyscrapers rise from both continents. The Blue Mosque and Topkapi Palace draw millions of tourists each year, but rewind exactly 1,224 years, to the year 800 AD, and stand in this same spot, and you'd be in the wealthiest, most sophisticated city on earth. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans in a ceremony in Rome, ruler of a fragmented, largely illiterate, almost entirely rural Western Europe, where wooden huts and dirt roads were the norm. That same day in Constantinople, Empress Irene ruled over a city of perhaps 400,000 people, nearly 10 times larger than any city in Western Europe. A city with running water supplied by ancient aqueducts, with paved streets and street lighting, with a gold-based economy, international banks, and trade networks reaching from Britain to China, with monumental stone architecture, public libraries, and a bureaucracy of educated civil servants. Constantinople in 800 AD was not medieval in the way we imagine the Middle Ages. It was the heir to Rome, and it hadn't fallen. Political context: the city that outlived Rome. To understand Constantinople in 800 AD, you must first understand that this was not a new city, but the continuation of the Roman Empire itself. When Emperor Constantine I founded Constantinople in 324 AD on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, he created a new Rome on the strait separating Europe and Asia. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, Constantinople and the Eastern Roman Empire, what historians now call the Byzantine Empire, survived and thrived. By 800 AD, Constantinople had been the capital of the Roman Empire for nearly 5 centuries. In the West, Charlemagne's coronation as Emperor of the Romans was a symbolic claim to revive Roman authority. But in Constantinople, Roman authority had never died. The Byzantines did not call themselves Byzantines, they called themselves Romans, Romaioi in Greek, and their empire was simply Romania. In 800 AD, the ruler of this Roman Empire was Empress Irene, who reigned from 797 to 802. She had taken power by overthrowing and blinding her own son, Emperor Constantine VI, in 797, a brutal act that secured her position as sole ruler but scandalized many who believed a woman could not legitimately rule the Roman Empire. Irene governed through an elaborate imperial court and bureaucracy centered in the Great Palace of Constantinople. She commanded armies, issued laws, collected taxes, and represented the Roman state in diplomatic relations with the Abbasid Caliphate, the new Carolingian Empire, and kingdoms from the Caucasus to North Africa. The Byzantine Empire in 800 AD controlled Constantinople, Greece, parts of southern Italy, Anatolia, modern Turkey, and islands across the Aegean and Mediterranean. Though much reduced from the empire's territorial peak under Justinian I in the 6th century, it remained a formidable power, controlling key trade routes and defending Christendom's eastern frontier against the expanding Islamic world. Urban layout: a city built on 7 hills. Constantinople occupied a triangular peninsula jutting into the waters where the Bosphorus Strait, the Sea of Marmara, and the Golden Horn Inlet converged. Like Rome, it was famously built on 7 hills. The most striking feature of the city was its walls. The Theodosian walls, built in 413 AD and extensively renovated over the centuries, protected the landward side of the peninsula. This was not a single wall, but a triple defensive system: a moat, an outer wall, an inner wall, and massive towers spaced along the roughly 6-kilometer land fortification. These walls had never been breached by a foreign enemy. On the seaward sides, additional walls protected the coastlines along the Golden Horn and Sea of Marmara, creating a nearly impregnable fortress city. The city stretched approximately 7 kilometers from the Theodosian walls to the tip of the peninsula where the old Acropolis stood. The main thoroughfare was the Mise, the middle street, a broad, colonnaded avenue running from the Forum of Constantine near the Great Palace, westward through the city to the Theodosian walls. This road was paved with stone, and at night, major streets were illuminated with oil lamps, a luxury unheard of in Western Europe. The Great Palace complex occupied the southeastern part of the city, near the Hippodrome and Hagia Sophia. This was not a single building, but a vast complex of reception halls, private apartments, churches, gardens, and administrative buildings sprawling across terraces overlooking the Sea of Marmara. The exact layout changed over centuries as emperors added structures, but in 800 AD remained the heart of imperial power. The Hippodrome, adjacent to the Great Palace, was the city's premier entertainment venue, a massive chariot racing stadium that could hold approximately 100,000 spectators. The arena was decorated with monuments brought from across the empire, including Egyptian obelisks and ancient Greek sculptures. Forum's large public squares punctuated the city. The Forum of Constantine, the Forum of Theodosius, and others served as gathering places, markets, and sites for public announcements. These forums were surrounded by colonnaded porticos, monumental columns, and statues celebrating emperors and military victories. Harbors lined the Golden Horn and Sea of Marmara coasts. The Golden Horn served as the primary naval base and commercial port. Dozens of ships docked daily, bringing grain from Egypt and the Black Sea region, wine from Greece, timber from the Black Sea forests, and luxury goods from across the known world. Architecture and infrastructure. The architecture of Constantinople in 800 AD was predominantly stone and brick, a stark contrast to Western Europe where timber construction dominated. The supreme architectural achievement was Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, built by Emperor Justinian between 532 and 537. This cathedral, with its massive dome rising 56 meters above the floor, was the largest enclosed space in the world and remained unmatched in scale until the Renaissance. The interior was covered with marble, mosaics depicting Christ, the Virgin Mary, saints, and imperial figures, and lit by countless windows that created an ethereal light filling the vast space. In 800 AD, Hagia Sophia served as the cathedral of the Patriarch of Constantinople and the site of imperial coronations and major religious ceremonies. The Aqueduct of Valens, built in the 4th century, still functioned in 800 AD, carrying water from sources over 20 kilometers away into the city. Water flowed through this and other aqueducts into massive underground cisterns, the largest being the Basilica cistern, which could store approximately 80,000 cubic meters of water. This system supplied public fountains, baths, the imperial palace, and private households of the wealthy. Public baths remained important social institutions, though they had declined from their Roman peak. Multiple bathhouses operated throughout the city, providing not just hygiene but socializing spaces where business was conducted, news was shared, and citizens of different classes mingled. Churches dotted every neighborhood. By 800 AD, Constantinople had hundreds of churches and monasteries. These ranged from small parish churches to large monastic complexes. The churches were built in the Byzantine style, with domes, brick and stone construction, elaborate mosaics, and richly decorated interiors. Private housing varied dramatically by class. The wealthy lived in substantial stone houses with multiple rooms, private courtyards, and sometimes private water supplies. Middle-class residences were typically multi-story structures, with shops or workshops on the ground floor and living quarters above. The poor lived in cramped apartments in multi-story tenement buildings, often with multiple families sharing small spaces. Population and social hierarchy. Constantinople's population in 800 AD is estimated at between 300,000 and 500,000 people, making it by far the largest city in Europe and one of the largest in the world, rivaled only by Baghdad, Chang'an in China, and possibly a few other Chinese or Middle Eastern cities. This population was rigidly hierarchical but remarkably diverse. At the apex stood the emperor in 800 AD, Empress Irene. The emperor was autocrat, supreme military commander, chief legislator, and God's representative on earth. The imperial court included the imperial family, high-ranking officials, palace guards, and countless servants and administrators. The Senate still existed, though it had transformed from the Roman Republican institution into an honorific body of aristocrats who served imperial administrative functions. Senators, magistrates, and high-ranking military officers formed the upper aristocracy, living in palatial homes and controlling vast estates. The imperial bureaucracy was extensive and remarkably sophisticated. Civil servants staffed departments handling taxation, justice, foreign relations, military logistics, and the imperial mint. These bureaucrats were often educated men who had studied Greek literature, rhetoric, and law. Literacy rates among the administrative class were high compared to Western Europe. Merchants formed a substantial middle class. Constantinople's position controlling trade between East and West had created a wealthy merchant community. Guild organizations regulated various trades. Silk merchants, goldsmiths, bakers, butchers, and numerous other professions were organized into corporations that set standards, controlled prices, and provided mutual support. Craftsmen and skilled workers, masons, carpenters, metalworkers, weavers, potters made up another significant portion of the population. Many worked in workshops, often family operations passed down through generations. The urban poor laborers, servants, unemployed lived in the most crowded districts. They depended on day labor, occasional employment, and imperial charity for survival. The emperors traditionally distributed free bread to citizens, a continuation of the Roman practice that helped maintain social stability. Slaves existed, but in declining numbers compared to the Roman past. Slavery persisted primarily in domestic service and some industries, but the institution was gradually fading in Byzantine society. The population was ethnically diverse. Greeks dominated, but the city included Armenians, Syrians, Jews, Slavs, Italians, and peoples from across the empire and beyond. Multiple languages were heard in the markets, though Greek was the lingua franca. Daily life rhythms of an ancient metropolis. Daily life in Constantinople in 800 AD followed rhythms shaped by religious observance, commercial activity, and the climate of the Eastern Mediterranean. Most people woke at dawn. The day began with prayer. Constantinople was a profoundly Christian city, and religious observance structured daily life. Church bells called the faithful to morning prayers. Many attended services at neighborhood churches before beginning the workday. Breakfast was simple, bread dipped in wine or olive oil, perhaps some cheese or dried fruit. Bread was the foundation of the Byzantine diet, and the city had numerous bakeries producing various types of loaves. The imperial government regulated bread prices and quality to prevent social unrest. For working people, the day meant labor. Craftsmen opened workshops that often fronted directly onto streets. Shops selling goods lined major thoroughfares. The markets, particularly the covered market halls near the forums, buzzed with activity as merchants displayed textiles, spices, pottery, metalwork, and foodstuffs. The main meal Deipnon was eaten in the afternoon or early evening. For common people, this typically consisted of bread, vegetable stew, or porridge, legumes, fish. Constantinople's position on the water made fish readily available. Cheese, olives, and wine diluted with water. Meat was less common for the poor, but featured regularly in wealthy households. The wealthy ate far more elaborately. Imperial and aristocratic banquets featured multiple courses, roasted meats, game birds, complex dishes with imported spices, honey-sweetened desserts, and fine wines from across the empire. Dining was a social ritual, with elaborate etiquette and entertainment. Public baths opened in the afternoon and were important social institutions. Men and women bathed at separate times or in separate facilities. The bathing sequence moved through progressively hotter rooms, tepidarium warm, caldarium hot, and back to frigidarium cold plunge, followed by massage and conversation. Entertainment centered on the Hippodrome. Chariot racing was an obsession in Constantinople. 4 racing factions, the Blues, Greens, Reds, and Whites, commanded passionate loyalty. Races were major social events attended by tens of thousands, including the emperor, who watched from the imperial box. Betting was common. Riots sometimes erupted when factional tensions boiled over. The Nika riots of 532 had nearly destroyed the city. Religious festivals and processions provided communal celebration. Saints' feast days, Easter, Christmas, and imperial anniversaries occasioned elaborate public ceremonies with processions through the streets, distribution of charity, and public celebrations. Trade and economy. The gold standard Constantinople's economy in 800 AD was the most sophisticated in Europe and rivaled only by the great Islamic and Chinese centers of trade. The foundation of this economy was stable gold coinage. The Byzantine solitus, also called the nomisma, was a gold coin of consistent weight and purity that had been minted since Constantine I. In an age when Western Europe had largely reverted to barter and silver pennies of wildly varying quality, the Byzantine gold solitus was accepted from Britain to India as reliable currency. This monetary stability facilitated trade and credit systems that supported a genuine market economy. Constantinople controlled the critical trade routes between Europe and Asia. Merchants brought silk from China via the Silk Road through Central Asia and Persia. Spices from India and Southeast Asia arrived via Arab intermediaries. Furs and slaves came from the Black Sea region and Slavic territories. Grain from Egypt and the Black Sea fed the city. Wine and olive oil came from across the Mediterranean. The city itself was a manufacturing center. Silk production was a closely guarded imperial monopoly. Byzantine silk, dyed in imperial purple, reserved for the emperor, was among the most valuable textiles in the world. Other industries included metalworking, jewelry, manuscript copying and illumination, recarving, and glassmaking. The imperial government regulated trade extensively. Guilds controlled production and prices. The eparch, the city prefect, enforced elaborate regulations covering everything from bread prices to silk exports. Foreign merchants were assigned specific areas where they could conduct business and were carefully monitored. Banking and credit systems operated, though not as developed as they would become in later medieval Italian cities. Money changers, often Jews or Syrians, facilitated currency exchange. Wealthy individuals and monasteries provided loans. Credit instruments allowed merchants to conduct long-distance trade without transporting vast amounts of gold. Taxation supported the enormous imperial bureaucracy and military. Tax collectors operated throughout the empire, and Constantinople was the center of financial administration. The imperial treasury, located in the Great Palace complex, held the accumulated wealth of centuries. Religion, orthodoxy, and icons. Religion dominated every aspect of life in Constantinople in 800 AD. This was not merely a Christian city, but the very heart of Orthodox Christianity. The Patriarch of Constantinople in 800 AD, Patriarch Tarasios, who served from 784 to 806, was one of the most powerful figures in the empire after the emperor. The Patriarch presided over Hagia Sophia, led religious ceremonies, and wielded enormous moral authority. The relationship between emperor and patriarch was complex. The emperor held supreme temporal authority, but the patriarch's spiritual authority could not be ignored. The year 800 fell during a critical period in Byzantine religious history. For decades, the empire had been torn by the iconoclast controversy, the debate over whether religious icons, images of Christ, Mary, and saints should be venerated or were idolatrous. In 787, the Second Council of Nicaea, convened by Empress Irene, had restored the veneration of icons, ending the first phase of iconoclasm. But tensions remained, and iconoclasm would return in 815. Icons in 800 AD were everywhere. Churches, homes, and even shops displayed painted icons of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and saints. Believers venerated these images, kissing them, lighting candles before them, and praying for intercession. This practice was central to Byzantine spirituality and distinguished Orthodox Christianity from the developing Catholic practices in the West. Monasticism was extremely important. Monasteries operated throughout Constantinople and the empire. Monks and nuns followed strict rules of prayer, fasting, and work. Monasteries served as centers of learning, copying manuscripts, providing charity, and offering spiritual guidance. Wealthy families often endowed monasteries, and many aristocrats retired to monastic life in old age. Religious processions and liturgy structured the year. The Byzantine liturgy, the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, was celebrated with elaborate ritual, chanting, incense, and rich vestments. Services were conducted in Greek and were far more ornate than the simpler services developing in Western churches. Saints' relics were treasured. Constantinople claimed to possess pieces of the true cross, the crown of thorns, and countless bones and belongings of martyrs and saints. These relics were displayed in churches, processed through streets on feast days, and believed to provide protection and miracles, defense and military power. Constantinople's survival depended on its formidable defenses and military capability. The Theodosian walls were the city's primary defense and had proven impregnable. Arab forces had besieged Constantinople twice in the 7th and early 8th centuries. A devastating siege from 717 to 718 had failed to breach the walls despite enormous Arab armies and naval forces. The walls' triple defense system, massive towers, and strategic position made direct assault nearly impossible. The Byzantine military in 800 AD was organized around the theme system military districts, where soldier farmers held land in exchange for military service. This system provided a standing army without the massive expense of maintaining professional troops year-round. The Byzantine navy controlled the seas around Constantinople. The city's position allowed it to dominate the Bosphorus, controlling all maritime traffic between the Black Sea and Mediterranean. The Byzantine navy's secret weapon was Greek fire, an incendiary liquid that burned on water and could not be extinguished with water. The formula was a closely guarded state secret, giving Byzantine ships a decisive advantage in naval warfare. The city garrison included professional soldiers, palace guards, and militia units. The imperial guard units, stationed in and around the Great Palace, were elite troops loyal to the emperor. In times of crisis, the entire male population could be mobilized for defense. Diplomatic skill complemented military strength. Byzantine diplomacy was legendary: gifts of gold, strategic marriages, playing enemies against each other, and intelligence gathering through an extensive network of spies and informants allowed Constantinople to survive surrounded by enemies. Conclusion: the city that preserved civilization. Standing in Constantinople in the year 800 AD, you would be in a city that embodied everything the medieval West had lost and would not recover for centuries. While Charlemagne's empire was a patchwork of rural estates, where most people were illiterate peasants living in wooden huts, Constantinople had 400,000 people living in stone buildings with running water, public libraries, street lighting, and a gold-based economy. While Western Europe struggled with local barter economies, Constantinople traded with 3 continents using stable currency and sophisticated credit systems. While the West built in timber, Constantinople built in marble and brick. While Western learning had contracted to scattered monasteries preserving fragments of classical knowledge, Constantinople had schools, universities, and libraries containing works of philosophy, science, and literature stretching back to ancient Greece. Constantinople in 800 AD was not medieval, a way we typically imagine the Middle Ages. It was the direct heir to Rome, the Roman Empire that had never fallen, still governing under Roman law, still calling itself Romania, still preserving the administrative sophistication, urban culture, and learning of the classical world. The transformation from this Byzantine Constantinople to modern Istanbul took more than 6 centuries. The Fourth Crusade sacked the city in 1204, devastating it and fracturing the empire. Byzantine Constantinople recovered, but never regained its former glory. When the Ottoman Turks finally breached the Theodosian walls in 1453, they conquered a much reduced city, still magnificent, but a shadow of its 9th century peak. The Ottomans rebuilt Constantinople as Istanbul, transforming Hagia Sophia into a mosque, building new palaces and mosques, and creating the city that would eventually become modern Istanbul. But beneath the Ottoman and modern layers, the bones of Byzantine Constantinople still exist: the walls, the cisterns, the Hippodrome's foundation, and Hagia Sophia itself. In the year 800, when Charlemagne's coronation symbolized the West's desperate attempt to reclaim Roman legitimacy, Constantinople needed no symbolism. It was Rome, the city where classical civilization survived, where the empire continued, where the glory and sophistication of the ancient world still lived, illuminating a dark age that existed everywhere else.